Good afternoon. I have to check in with y'all way earlier in the day because of my new work schedule, but it will continue to be on Tuesdays, but it will be at noon. Noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central. And as of course, you can always like, share, and subscribe to our page. That way you are notified whenever we go live. And you can also check the videos after the broadcast is finished and, consume them at your own leisure or leisure. So today is going to be quick and dirty, but it's going to be very, very information dense. And so this is basically the most basic structure of life is a single cell. So we're going to be talking about some of the different kingdoms, and then we're going to talk about a couple of different types of cell types. So there's two different cell types that belong, in between these different kingdoms. And then we're going to get into some of the structure and the function of the structure of the cell. So nothing too deep, but we're going to definitely, as always, how we always do on here, apply it to something that is relatable to you. Most people aren't, planning on being cell biologists. So we're not going to be, scientific the whole time, but still scientific. You know how we rock it over here. I'm trying to get some more light. That's a little bit better. Yeah. So I'm not in a full shadow here. I know it is like getting close to Halloween, but I don't think this is a scary topic. It might be to some. So kingdoms. The kingdoms are an overarching class to identify and categorize different living organisms. That's the most general definition of that. And so there are, six? Six kingdoms, and two are prokaryotic, meaning that their nucleus is not an enclosed, their DNA is not closed up in a little ball in what is called a nucleus, or the central part of the cell. So all their stuff is just floating around in their cytoplasm, which is the jelly, gooey like stuff that all of the stuff inside the cell sits in. And so those prokaryotes are Archaea Bacteria and Eubacteria. So Eubacteria is like the first like real bacteria single cell organism that, that was around, that came into existence. And Archaea Bacteria, they're kind of like bacteria, but not really. And because of their cell walls, they're found in like super, super harsh environments. So like around like volcanoes and geysers, hot springs, those type of things, like where like you wouldn't necessarily find, like where it's extremely hot, very acidic, like real, like nothing could possibly live there. They do. All right. And so these are called the different types of organisms in this kingdom, or in the domain. So the domain is under the kingdom. So the overall kingdom is Archaea Bacteria, and the domain is Archaea. And the organisms found in that domain are methanogens. So when you think of methanogens, meaning they produce methane. So when they respirate or when they go through their cellular process, it produces gases. So that's why a lot of those really harsh areas tend to be flammable. And so sometimes with the hot springs, not only are they highly acidic, but they can be quite flammable as well, sometimes due to the products that these bacteria give off. And fun fact about these is that the methanogens are actually also found in our gut, in our stomachs, and other animals' stomachs. So that is That's pretty cool, huh? And Archaea bacteria are believed to be pretty much the earliest life form on this planet. Like when everything was super inhospitable, there wasn't any real oxygen in the atmosphere. Archaea bacteria are believed to be the first ones to stake their claim here. Halophiles literally means they love halogens. So these are going to be your organisms that either use or rely on a source of some type of halogen like fluorine, chlorine, iodine. Those are the halogen group. Remember, we went through the periodic. You see why we started there, because everything else kind of stems from that. And thermophiles just basically means they love heat. So, like I said, really, really hot areas that you wouldn't think anything would be able to survive. So, hot springs near volcanoes, they call them hydrothermal vents. So, those would be the places that are usually near volcanoes. And psychrophiles, I believe those are the ones that love cold. So, in extremely cold environments where you would think nothing would survive, these things are surviving and thriving. So they are a prokaryotic cell type, meaning they have no organelles or membrane bound cell structures. And for their metabolism, basically how they get their energy, how they get their nutrients, and what they produce. It depends on the different whatever species you're talking about. So some need oxygen, some need hydrogen, some need carbon dioxide, sulfur, or sulfide. So sulfide is a mixture of sulfur and oxygen. And sulfur is the element by itself. So sulfides tend to be those oxide mixtures. And any combination of those things might be needed for the cell to do its thing. So how it gets its nutrition also depends on the species. And it can occur through absorption, meaning it literally just like soaks up stuff from the environment around it. Non-photosynthetic photophosphorylation. So photosynthetic meaning made from using sunlight. So non-photosynthetic meaning that these processes are occurring in the dark or in a space where sunlight cannot penetrate. So these could be in caves, in underground, or just generally not accessible to the surface where sunlight would reach. And so photophosphorylation means that there is still some type of light source, it's just not sun. Or chemosynthesis, basically meaning a chemical, they're like they take when they absorb these things or when they come into contact with something else, they basically use chemistry to repurpose things or to literally take oxygen and hydrogen, and through a chemical process they generate the things that they need to do their regular processes. These are strictly asexual, so they reproduce without another cell being nearby or necessary. And that's by binary fission. So basically meaning that they just multiply, split into two, and you get twos and twos everywhere. Budding means that they create a structure, like it's like a reproductive structure that they extend out from their body, and then that's how they produce another one of itself. And it usually starts out smaller or not the same size as the original structure, and it grows into a larger structure. Or fragmentation, meaning a piece of the cell just literally just pops off, and it has some of the stuff like that's in that in that cell. As long as there's some genetic material in there, it can go off and become a fully functioning cell. I'm trying to use my mouse. Hey, Marley King. I caught you early in the day too. Glad you was able to tune in. Yeah, we're getting to the nitty and the gritty now. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, I didn't forget about you. I started a new job, so I had to adjust the schedule a little bit once I figured out what my work schedule was going to be. So today is the only day I'll be doing this on a Wednesday. Next week it will be Tuesday at the same time though. And then our first true bacteria. So the Archaea bacteria aren't considered true bacteria, mostly because of the way their structure and function. Like it's a whole bunch of stuff. We may or may not get into that because I don't think it's like super necessary, but I would definitely say it's something that you could research on your own because it's plenty interesting. I took a lot of this stuff in my high school and college level biology class. Like it's covered more than one time throughout, your scientific exposure through school, especially if you went to college and you were in a scientific major of some sort. So eubacteria, that's EU, not you, not YOU, EU bacteria. They are true bacteria and most are not harmful. I know a lot of people kind of associate, all of the bad stuff, the sicknesses and diseases and illnesses and stuff with bacteria, but most bacteria, they're in their own world, they chill, and a lot of stuff that they do doesn't directly affect us or most of the organism, the multicellular, because we're multicellular. These are unicellular or single cellular organisms I'm currently talking about. So most of their functions and stuff don't really affect us directly, especially not in a negative way. And there's a few that do obviously cause illness and disease and things. And a lot of times, like when we talk about infections, it's usually an infection of a bacteria that already exists in, on, or around our body. It's just an overgrowth of it. And so that's where the problems tend to come in. And a lot of times it's due to a lapse in our own immune system that allows them to do that, or a change in our environment that we're not properly prepared for. Several different factors might cause them to overgrow and cause us problems at that point. But for the most part, they're harmless and, they chill out and do their thing. And a lot of them actually protect us from harmful bacteria. So like I said, don't over sanitize, don't be nasty now, but don't over sanitize either. Cause they're our friend. Like, when you find that sweet spot, it's a very nice community of us and them. Okay. And they're also the main microscopic organisms that compose microbiota. So the microbiota is basically the biome or the home, the environment, the living space of our body. And this is the micro scale. So the very, very microscopic community that lives in, on, and around us, and they compose of that population, and they play a large role in so many things. So because I was gonna wait until I got to the animalia, but since we're talking about them, I guess this counts. So basically the importance of them in our microbiome. I'm going to give y'all some numbers here. Okay. Don't go and get like clean freaking, all of that on me after this, because like I said, you can't get rid of them. You can do whatever you want. You can't get rid of them. You can only upset the balance and cause problems that weren't there. So chill. There are 10 to 100 trillion. The T, not a B. Trillion is way more than billion, okay? for scale. So 10 to 100 trillion symbiotic, meaning that they live in harmony with us, microbial cells harbored by each person, primarily in our gut, that make up our microbiota. So the gut, people think like it's just your stomach, but your gut actually also includes your intestines as well, because that's actually where we absorb our nutrients. So you don't really absorb a lot of nutrients and things in your stomach, mostly because your stomach is lined with a mucosal membrane that protects it from the stomach acid, because we have hydrochloric acid in our stomach that melts and breaks down all of the food items and things into like this little sludge that is then processed by our miles of intestine. And so we don't absorb a lot in our stomach. Some things, not a whole lot though. Even water, pretty much everything that we get from our food that's nutritional, we either absorb it in our mouth, because that's where our digestion actually starts. We have enzymes in our saliva, and we also have bacteria in our mouth as well that help with starting the breakdown of the food that we eat. And then once it gets in the stomach acid helps break down the proteins further and separate them into what they call macro molecules. So it breaks down the tissues and cells and things like that. And then once it gets into your digestive, your intestines, then that's when liquids are absorbed. There's other bacteria in there that eat on the food particulates and things that's in there, and they're the ones that actually break down the sludge and the mess into molecules that our bodies can absorb through our intestinal wall, and we can then use the stuff. So that's, you see how important, like this, they have a really important job in us, but they do more than just that. So there are more than 10,000 different microbe species that researchers have identified living in the human body. So there's probably, I can almost guarantee there's a whole lot more, and which is why it says there's more than 10,000, because they've only been able to identify about that many. But there's a whole lot more. Trust me, out of 100 trillion, I guarantee you there's more than a couple of different thousand, kinds of species in there. So there's probably some that we just don't have the means to identify or whatever, or they probably thought it was something else, or you just never know, or it's in such a small concentration or in such an obscure part of the body, like we wouldn't know to test that area for. They're in there. Trust me, they're there. 100 to 1 is the ratio. So the genes in our microbiome outnumber the genes in our genome. So our genome is how many genes in our DNA helix, basically, compared to the genes in all of these bacteria and their DNA helices. So you have 100 trillion, up to 100 trillion different little microscopic organisms living inside your body, and you take all of their types of DNA, put it together, the difference is 100 times our DNA. So if you would say, they probably make up a larger portion of our genetic coding and expression than our personal DNA does. And I think that speaks a lot to the uniqueness of not just our outer environment, but our inner environment. So there's been all types of research being done on different cultures around the world, how they eat, why they're not susceptible to certain diseases and all kinds of things. And a lot of that has been tied to the diversity in their microbiome, in their guts. And so a lot of what the SAD diet, the standard American diet, does is that those processed sugars, fats, and things like that actually kill off our microbiome. It kills off these bacteria and things that we need to absorb nutrients from our foods and to also protect us. So if we don't have this genetic diversity in our gut and our microbiome, then it leaves us susceptible to foreign bacteria that don't belong in our stomachs or on our bodies and things like that. And so we tend to be more susceptible to things that, should kind of just, roll off your shoulder and, you keep it moving. 22,000 is the approximate number genes in the human gene catalog. So out of the 7 point whatever billion numbers of people on the planet, there is a variation of 22,000 different genes that any individual DNA can choose from. So obviously, you know, there's other things that play into that. We are going to talk about genetics, because that was like one of my favorite courses in college. So don't worry, we're definitely going to get into that. But let's say you have like the alphabet. So it's basically like the genetic alphabet. Instead of it being 26 letters, there's 22,000 words or letters. So like the dictionary, because like the letters would be the individual amino acids. So not that, because there's a finite number of those, but the combinations of those make that number so huge. And so that's why that number is so big. 99.9%. So this is the percentage individual humans are identical to one another in terms of host genome. So obviously that's not, we're all related, but we're not related. Like, if that makes sense. That's what that's saying, is that because if you think about it in terms of relativity, like the amount of genetic variation between bacteria and the amount of genetic variation between us is so huge. Like, they have so much more genetic diversity than we do as humans. So we only have about 22,000, you know, to choose from. And imagine if in just one person that there's 100 times more genetic variation in the bacteria that lives in just one person. So imagine out of 22,000 different genetic combinations for all the 7 billion people on the planet. Now imagine that much genetic variation between 100 trillion different microscopic bacteria. So yeah, they got us beat on all fronts. So trust me, find a way to make bacteria your friend. I'm gonna start there, and that's why what's that? Kombucha is a great source of what they call probiotics. So basically, it's adding to your biota, your microbiota. So it's adding the bacteria to your gut when you drink the kombucha, because it is fermented using, you guessed it, bacteria. So as the bacteria grow, they eat the stuff that, you know, that's in the kombucha. I think it's usually made with like tea and stuff, but for the most part, it has to have some type of energetic source. So sugar. So there's usually some type of sugar in there, and that keeps the bacteria alive and growing and munching. And then what they produce, so when they eat the stuff, they produce something. And so we drink what they produce. And then they also, of course, they're not going to stay, you know, just floating on top, because usually it gets like this little blob of bacteria or whatever growing on top of it. And I believe it's some type of yeast as well. We actually will talk about yeast, because I think they're in the next or one of the following kingdoms that we'll be covering. And so those two together, yeast and bacteria, they are not the same thing. So together they make the fermented kombucha, and it tastes pretty good if you know, flavor it and stuff. So I would definitely say have a bottle or two a week, especially if you're just starting. I would say sip the bottle slowly, because it was one time I tried to like do it, like just drink the whole bottle like in one sitting, because technically you're supposed to drink the whole 12-ounce serving. Like, that's one serving, and that'll get you right. But if you're not used to doing that, drink it slowly, because I was so bloated and so like congested, because it was just too much for my gut, because I wasn't used to it. So when you get used to it, then, you know, it doesn't have such a uncomfortable effect. But trust me, it's worth the discomfort. All right. Especially because I think at that time I had like ran out of my normal probiotic. And so I just grabbed a bottle of that, and I thought, well, because I was using this other probiotic, but it's not the same. So yeah, take time, easy selfie. Up to 90% of all disease can be reached in some way back to the gut and the health of the microbiome. So most of the stuff that goes wrong with us actually starts with our microbiome. going wrong. So it's kind of like, you know, when they talk about, oh, a woman's pH balance, like it's the same thing. Okay. So once our microbiome becomes imbalanced, it causes all types of other stuff to go awry. So it's very, like I said, it's very important to strengthen your microbiome and not eat things that will kill off bacteria, because you need all of them. 10 times, there are 10 times as many outside organisms as there are human cells in the body. So all the stuff that makes up you, all of your animal cells, there are 10 times as many bacteria cells. So for every one human cell, you got 10 bacteria hanging around, like, you know, just chatting. Like what you need. And just think of them like our helpers. So, you know, when you want help, don't you want, isn't it better, you know, say many hands make light work? So imagine how complex our bodies are. Wouldn't you want your body to have a ton of help? All right. 3.3 million is the number of non-redundant genes in the human gut microbiome. So remember that number I told you before, 22,000? Well, they gave us their number. Like I said, their number is always going to be way bigger. And I think that's like what, 100 or 1,000 times bigger, because what, 22,000 to a million? Yeah. So yeah, about 100 times. And they are amazing for that. Like that's what makes them so able to specialize. And I think that that's why it's so important to have them, because for us, like when we think of our whole body moving and what we do in our day-to-day lives, it's very rare that you find someone who specializes in just one thing. Like if you talk to somebody, it's like, oh, what do you do? They'll say the one thing that they do. But then if you ask, oh, what do you like to do? It's usually not the thing that they do or the thing that they get paid for. And they're probably really good at both. And then you find out that there's something else that they want to get into, or that's like a hobby or like their little secret, whatever. And they're pretty good at that too. Bacteria aren't like that. The thing that they do, that's what they do. And they're excellent at it. In fact, they're masters at it, because that's the only thing that they do. And so because of that, they can specialize, and there's so much more variation because there's so many other things that need to be done, but they can't keep up with doing more than one thing because they're prokaryotes. They don't have cellular membranes and other organelles in their cells that are separated in places where they can store, you know, other things that they would necessarily need to do. So, you know, there's great power in specialization and mastery. Okay. And they show us that every day. Every day you wake up and you get to moving and eating it. Trust me, bacteria has a very big role in all of that. 80 to 90% is the percentage of individual humans are different from another in terms of their microbiome. So as you can see, there's still very close similarity between each individual human, but as you can see, it's actually more variation than our genetic coding. So it was 99.9% is the difference, is how similar we are from one individual to another based on our genes. So and we're only 80 to 90% different. You see that? Well, actually, no, they're using different words here. So it's identical and different. So basically, we're only about 20 to 10% identical if we're using the same language as we did with the 99.9% identical as far as our genome, our genetics are concerned. So we're only about 20 to 10% identical based on our microbiome. Isn't that interesting? Like if you could get someone's stomach acid or like fecal matter or like, I don't know, or urine, I believe also kind of ties into this microbiome. You can get, you can culture bacteria and find out what bacteria live in this person's gut, you know, by microbiome. And you can identify them more accurately based on that than you could from their DNA. Mind blown. Okay. So our next group. Did I go through all of this stuff? Yeah. Okay. So Protista is the next kingdom. So Protista consists of protozoa. I know you've heard of protozoa, protozoans. They have animal characteristics. Some have plant characteristics. So Protista is the kingdom, and these are the different things in it. And the protozoa are like animal cells, or they give like animal characteristics. So they have to ingest. They usually eat their food. So they'll eat other cells. They don't have a way to make their own food, or they don't absorb nutrients from their surrounding environment. Algae have plant characteristics, so they make their own food via photosynthesis. Slime molds act like fungi. So fungi, they're an interesting group, but for the most part, they are what are called saponophytes. Am I pronouncing that right? But basically, they degrade and what is that? Yeah, they basically degrade other organic material and then eat the slop of whatever is left. And so slime molds act the same way. And I would say for this, look up a video of slime molds. They are a very interesting group of fungi like things, because the way that they move as single cells, and they also can move as a multicellular unit, but they are still single cells. And even when they reproduce, they do like this strange thing where they make like this, they stack up. Each single cell kind of finds its own job in this reproductive process, and it makes this bud like spores, kind of like the same way fungi do when they make mushrooms. Like mushrooms are the basic flowering or sexual body of mycelium, which is the actual fungi organism. And that's what I'm saying. Fungi are super interesting. So I think we had like almost a whole semester on just slime molds and fungi. Like that's how interesting these two groups are. And some have mitochondria, which is a organelle that's usually found in eukaryotes. And it's also believed to be a single cellular organism that became symbiotic, meaning living with in harmony, in another single celled organism that ate it, but couldn't digest it. So it's like a protozoa came along, ate an amoeba type situation, and then it couldn't digest the amoeba, and the amoeba was like, well, it's kind of comfy in here, and it's like, hey, eat that thing over there, and then it ate it, and then the mitochondria ate the thing that it ate and produced something that was useful for the cell that ate it originally. It was like, oh, okay, this might work out for us. So it just kind of hung around like that, and then boom, you got animal cells. I don't think it was boom, but but it's a very interesting story for that. And the thing with the Protista, especially like protozoans, many are parasitic pathogens, and they cause disease in animals. So I'm trying to think, because I'm like picturing them, but I can't think of their name. It'll probably come to me later. But I believe it's sleeping sickness that is caused by a protozoan, and it's usually like waterborne illnesses and things. Those are actually not caused by bacteria; they're caused by protozoa. So yeah, messed up. Some are like bacteria, like especially like if it's unclean water that tend to have like fecal matter in it, like if they don't have like good plumbing and stuff like that, and their waste water ends up in their drinking water, then it can be bacteria. But for the most part, if it's from like a natural source and it's not contaminated with human waste and animal waste and things like that, then 9 times out of 10 it's a protozoan that's causing the problem. And others exist in commensalistic or mutualistic relationships with their host. So commensalism is basically meaning that one thing is benefiting from the interaction or the relationship, and the other thing is not, but the other thing that is not benefiting is also not being harmed. And mutualistic basically means both are benefiting from the presence of that relationship. And those are types of what they call symbiosis. So basically living together. That's quite literally what that means. Sim, together, bios, living. So literally living together. And in this domain for Protista, they are eukarya. So eukarya describes the cell type. So they have enclosed organelles with membranes and all of that stuff in their cells. And the organisms are amoebae, green algae, brown algae. So yeah, you think like because in my mind, like, don't confuse it with seaweed, because I don't know, for some reason, like in my mind when I hear these names, I think of seaweed and I'm thinking like no, these are little, they're, for the most part, they're microscopic, but when they group together in big enough, like, clusters, you can actually see them, and they are green because of their chlorophyll that because I think that's why my connection is acting up. Okay, there we go. I'm back. And brown algae is brown because it has a different type of chlorophyll. I believe it has two different types of chlorophyll, and it also has some like kind of fat stuff in it too. That was also a pretty interesting section in biology when we went over the different types of algae. That was really cool. And we actually looked at all of these under a microscope. So amoeba, the green algae, look like little tiny green specks, and then when you look at it closer, you can actually see that it has like these little organelles in it. The chlorophyll is nucleus, like it looks so cool. Brown algae is the same way, and it does have like this little fat body in it. Diatoms, those were really cool. I think those are probably my favorite because they actually have really hard outer shells. It's almost like glass. So their cell membrane actually incorporates silicon dioxide, which is sand, and glass is made from sand. So they tend to hang around in, ocean water near beaches and things like that. And so, but you wouldn't know they're there because they're microscopic. But yeah, they're glassy, and like if you push the slide down too hard, you can actually hear them crunch. Like, yeah, that was strange. But yeah, they do. They'll break open and all their stuff will like fall out. So, Euglena is a type of, I believe, protozoan, and that one you can see it moving. And slime molds, like I said, are really cool. So if you can look up on YouTube, they'll probably have like some videos of these things under the microscope if you can't get into somebody's lab and look at them yourself under a microscope. They need oxygen for metabolism, as do pretty much all the other eukaryotes, with the exception of plants because they use carbon dioxide, but some form of oxygen. Oxygen needs to be in the mix for these. The Archaea bacteria, a lot of times if you've smelled something, like if you've gone by like the side of the road, like after it rains and it's kind of like swampy and marshy and stuff, or if you've ever been to a swamp or a marsh and you've disturbed the surface of the waters and things like that, or even all the way down to the bottom of the water, like if it's like, not too deep, that smell, that is actually their respiration process. So because they're not using oxygen, the things that they're giving off are sulfur based byproducts. And so sulfur has like that, how the sulfur smells, it has that smell to it. And so that's why, because instead of oxygen being in those compounds like carbon dioxide, they end up with sulfides that are like sulfate, sulfide, sulfite. They might even have like some carbosulfide combination there too. And this is, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. And nutrition acquisition. So depending on the species, so as I named all these different species, they might get their nutrition from absorption, photosynthesis, or ingestion. And that's what I was saying. Absorption is the fungi-like ones, the slime molds. Photosynthesis are the plant-like ones, the algae that I named. The diatoms and the Euglena, I believe, are also in that category as well. Especially the Euglena. The Euglena are really pretty. They tend to make, so they're single cells, but they'll like group together. I believe that's them. And these big like balls of multicellular, unicellular. So they group together in these balls of them. And it's really interesting to see. Look that up. And ingestion. So that's the animal-like characteristics that amoeba possess. They actually eat other single-celled things around them. And most of their reproduction is asexual, but meiosis occurs in some species. So the meiosis would mostly occur in the slimos. That's what I'm saying. Their whole situation is very interesting. So yeah, they're the weird bunch out of this with their reproduction. All the other ones are asexual. They just part, yeah, by mitosis. So asexual is usually a mitosis. So the cell just multiplies its DNA and then divides. And meiosis is actually how gametes in humans are formed for sexual reproduction. So our cells pull the DNA apart. So you end up with half of the genetic code and half of the chromosome in each of these, what we call gametes. So in an egg cell, it only has half of the genetic material. Sperm cells only have half of the genetic material. So when those two come together, you get a full genetic material and half from each parent. Fungi, they include both unicellular, which are the yeast and molds, and multicellular, which are the mushrooms that we see, organisms. And unlike plants, fungi don't do photosynthesis. So they are the ones that recycle nutrients back to the environment. So when you see fallen trees, dead animals in the forest, one is like, if animals die out in the forest, like no one's burying them or eating them or whatever, like what happens to them? Fungi happen. Okay. And even humans, like if you're buried not in one of those like metal caskets and stuff, some people actually do get buried in pine boxes. Some people don't use boxes at all. Some people get buried like wrapped in cloth and things like that, because you can actually be recycled to the earth that way, but you can't if you're embalmed and put in a metal casket and all of that jazz. So yeah, make sure you research that, because how you want your remains taken care of after you are gone is wholly your decision. If you decide it before you go, once you go, you obviously can't decide that anymore. So yeah, make all the decisions that you can now, and don't be so afraid of death, because it's a natural part of the life cycle, and the earth is going to accept you back with open arms, and your spirit is going to go home to God, especially if you've accepted God. Okay, so don't think like, oh well, I'm like, no. There is a process for that as well. But yeah, make all your decisions now, because you can't do it once it's over. And they also they get their food through absorption. So once they decompose stuff, they soak up what they decomposed. And interestingly enough, these are some of the most poisonous things on the planet to us. So not all of them, but like a small number, a very small number. And the most poisonous fungi tend to grow like near marshlands and things like that. And they tend to look very, very alarming and bright, and like they look like don't eat me. Like they look like that. So like the mushrooms in Super Mario, those are actually poisonous. Like there's a variety that look just like those, and some of them, like you can't tell which ones are poisonous and which one aren't because they look similar. They have the red with the white spots on them. Some of those are extremely poisonous, and then some of those aren't. So that's why I say if you find a mushroom in the forest, don't just eat it because you don't know if it's poisonous or not. And then fungi is also one of those groups that have a ton of unidentified species. So yeah, it might be a new species and nobody knows if it's poisonous or not, and you just ate it. So be careful. But they're also very beneficial to us because that's where we get our antibiotics like penicillin from. So they are the ones that really help lower the mortality rate for hospitalization for like simple stuff, like people would cut their fingers, if you like got a scratch from a, you know, not even a rusty nail, just like a scratch from something out in nature, out in, you know, the outdoors, and you don't know what was growing on it and stuff, and you think you've cleaned it and you didn't clean it soon enough or fast enough, and now you have like this nasty, you know, pus growing. Like it could be a mess. So before, people have to get those limbs and things amputated, and then even the amputation surgery could cause problems because that has to heal too now. So now you have a gaping open wound from a limb that you had to have cut off because it was infected so bad, and they could like, and if you get the infection in your bloodstream, now the infection is being circulated through your body and it's no longer just in that. So that's usually why they amputate it. But if the amputation is also now getting, now you have a problem. So that saves, like, especially like when the wars and stuff were, the world wars and things like that, a lot of the casualties weren't necessarily from battlefield kills. They were from them dying of infection in the clinics and hospitals and things that were that, you know, that they were being treated in, because there was no way to actually stop these infections from spreading from gunshot wounds, or them having to amputate something from a gunshot wound, or limbs being blown off from bombs and things like that. So this revolutionized like medicine completely. And even with childbirth, women were dying from infection, from, you know, if they had a tear or something, or they had to cut them, or, you know, they had a cesarean or things like that. So it's all types of things that this really saved us from falling prey to. So the organisms that this group includes, like I said, mushrooms, yeast, and molds, they need oxygen for cellular metabolism. So to do their cellular thing, they need oxygen. And most of their production is reproduction is through asexual spore formation. So if you look at mushrooms, under the mushroom cap, there's those little gills. It's thousands and millions of little tiny spore cells under that cap. And so what happens is the mushroom will like kind of plop its like up, and it like shoots the spores out, and that's how it reproduces, and it sends them, they float off in the wind and land on something else. If they land on some dead stuff that it can grow and decompose, then boom, you got more mushrooms. And the yeast also have a pretty interesting spore situation, but molds, I believe, are the and I believe mushrooms also have a form of sexual reproduction as well, but it's not the mushroom form of it. Like I said, this group is pretty interesting with some of its other things that it has going on. Plantae is our plant kingdom. So obviously, you know, that's our green leafies and our flowers and all of that stuff. So they have vascular, meaning it has a root and vein system, like, you know, the little lines that you see in the leaves. That's the vascular system. And also a non-vascular system, meaning that it does not have any of that stuff. It doesn't have roots or those little, you know, veins and things that you see in the leaves. Flowering and non-flowering. So I believe these are like mosses and things like that. Ferns don't flower either. So the leafy plants that you see that never have flowers, but somehow they have seeds and things like that, that's them. So you have seed bearing, and then you also have non-seed bearing plants. So they also do spores as well. So I believe ferns are the ones that have the strange reproductive cycle, and that might be where these are referring to. So I would check out the fern reproductive cycle. And they are primary producers, meaning that they get their food from the sun. They make their own food, so they don't eat something else, and that makes them a primary producer. And they support life in most of the food chains in the planet's major biomes. So biome, like I said, is environment, also a biological home. So I'll call it a biome. There's about 10, I think. And some of the some examples would be the desert. Tundra is an extremely cold climate. So like Antarctica, the North Pole, those are considered tundras. Grasslands, in various types of forests. So, you know, the rainforest, tropical forest, like all the different types. There's a bunch of different type of like forest designations. Not gonna go over that here because we're not doing environmental science here. And wetlands. So I mentioned them slightly earlier when talking about the poisonous mushrooms growing, but those tend to be like swamps, marshes, and things like that. So the land is literally wet. It's like at least like an inch or two of water across the ground, and things grow in it, under it, on top of it, around it, out of it. Like, yeah, wetlands tend to be very biologically diverse, just like rainforests tend to be, mostly because of the water and the variation of the places that things have to live and grow and feed on. So these are true plants. So the fungi, like I said, some of its structures and things people think of as plants, they're not plants, but these are true plants. And they are eukaryotic as well. So they have enclosed organelles. And we're going to talk about some of the differences that they have to animal cells once we get through the animal list here. And they metabolize via photosynthesis. So when they take, like, they're a little bit complicated. So these are like very general, like, overview of what they have going on. Plants have their whole own little section. So we'll probably have to cover, if we do cover this, we will, because we eat plants and it's important to know what they got going on. So we'll cover this eventually, but right now we're just doing a broad overview and introduction. They get their nutrition through absorption, so from their roots and things like that, and photosynthesis. So they create their own nutrition in some plant. And some things they have to actually absorb from the soil. So nitrogen, they have to get that from the soil. And fungi and other bacteria on their roots actually help them do that by fixing the nitrogen that's in the soil. Nitrogen fixation basically means it takes it from its elemental N2 form to a biologically, you know, active form, or something that a living thing can use. So it turns it into a nitrate. So NO4, NO3, those types of substances can be used by plants and animals to make our amino acids. And they reproduce using seeds and spores. So, and that is sexual reproduction. So plants, any sexual reproduction is anything that requires two things. So if you can't do it alone by yourself, you were like in a locked away in a whatever, and you can still make an extra person, or an extra thing, then that is not asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction requires at least two of the thing mixing their genetic material to create another organism like itself. Animalia, that is the animal kingdom, and our domain is Eukarya, because we have our very membrane, organelle bound membrane, membrane bound organelles. I said it backwards. And organisms include mammals. So we are mammals. Mammals are anything that has mammary glands. So mammary glands are produce milk. So yeah, we nurse our young. That's what they call it, nursing your young. When you breastfeed, so mammals all fall into that. So whales are mammals because they do have mammary glands, and whale babies actually drink whale milk. So amphibians, when you hear that, you think of frogs. So yes, frogs are amphibians. They are both aquatic and terrestrial. So frogs actually can't survive out of, they have to have some type of moisture on their body or they could get sick. Certain processes and things don't work well. So yeah, they do still need water, but they can definitely live on land, but it needs some moisture in their life. Sponges are, and for the longest, when we first started using like disc sponges, they literally were the sponges from out of the ocean. So sponges are actually animals. Go figure. Yes. Another very interesting topic that was covered in biology. Like, you would be surprised at the stuff that you learn in like biology class, especially when they start going over the aquatic animals and things like that. So the largest portion of the animal kingdom actually lives in the water. So we think of ourselves as like, oh, we're the animal. Like, no, like the land mass is what, like 30% of the Earth's surface, 70% of it is water. So if most of the Earth is water, wouldn't most of the animals live in it? So insects, yes, insects are actually a part of the animal kingdom, but after the domain, so like there's a labeling system. So animal is the kingdom, the domain is Eukarya, and so that's a very big group still, as you can see from all the things that's included in it. And then all of these things actually have their own, what they call phylum or phyla. So that's just another group. And so it gets real specific, and then you get, to the name and stuff, and then you get like the species, and then that's where it gets extreme specific. That's where specific came from, species, or is that where species came? I'm gonna have to look that up. Which came first, the species or the specific? So oxygen is needed for metabolism. So obviously that's why we need oxygen. For all of our cell functions, we need oxygen. Nutrition acquisition is ingestion. So there is no animal that makes its own food. All right. Every animal has to eat something else to get its nutrition. And most are sexual reproduction, and some have asexual reproduction. I can't think off the top of my head what animals, but like I said, because Eukarya is still a very big group, it does include some smaller organisms that are still animals. But yeah, it's a lot going on. So on to the cell structure. So the difference between animals and plants, like the biggest difference between animal cells and plant cells, is that plant cells have a cell wall. So the cell wall is a very rigid, like sturdy structure, and not a whole lot can damage it, break it, get through it. So they have like these little holes in it that allow things in and out, that allow it to let moisture out, that allow it to get other things, out of the cell, and allows things into the cell as well. And it even allows them to transfer things between cells with it. So like the leaf has different plant cells on the leaf surface, right? So those leaf cells have to be able to transmit and transfer different nutrients and things between the individual cells. And so there's a little like bridges, quite literally little bridges between those plant cells that extend beyond the cell walls. And that is actually the main reason why it's very hard for humans to break down all of the plant cell material. And that's where the roughage comes in, the fiber and things like that, because that's what the cell wall is made of. And we don't necessarily break that down very easily, which is why we cook our food. And so cooking your vegetables, for one, makes more of its nutrients available, but it can also destroy some of the nutrients, which is why it's good to eat a mixture of cooked and raw fruits and vegetables, because you just never know what you're missing out on every time you burn them up. I mean, cook them. So, and also some things that I've been seeing more commonly in my like nutrition research is like if you eat like seeds and peas and things like that, actually letting them sprout. So sprouted seeds actually have a lot more nutritional content and antioxidants, and a lot of that nutritional content is actually more readily available for you to eat, and you can possibly eat them raw as well once you sprout them. But they sell sprouted seeds, but I did read that there is some caution with that, because the circumstances under which you have to sprout them, they need to be moist, covered, and all that is prime breeding ground for bacteria and mold. So you want to make sure that it is a sanitary sprouting process. So if you are buying them from someone else, make sure that you trust the trust the seller, that you understand their sprouting process, their their sanitation practice, all that stuff, and that they're reputable, because I don't want you getting sick trying to get healthy. That has happened. I've seen different documentaries and stories about people who went on the health kick. They started juicing, but because you're getting a lot more exposure to nutrients that your body wasn't getting before, you find out that you're allergic to stuff that you didn't know you were allergic to. You find out that your regular detox organs, your kidneys and your liver, aren't functioning properly. So you end up in a more toxic situation than a healthy one, even though these are nutrients that are meant to get you healthy. Because your body isn't processing them properly, it actually becomes more of a toxic situation. So yeah, it's a lot of stuff to look out for. That's why people are out here hiring nutrition coaches. That's why you get you a nutrition coach like Doc Ock. All right, so we can help you with these things and make sure that you are not putting yourself in danger by wanting to be healthier. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be healthier, but it's definitely a right and a wrong way to do it. And mostly because we're working from behind in the race. Like I said, the sad diet, our American food culture never really focused on the nutrition of food. It was mostly just eating to survive, like was eating for survival. And so a lot of the actual nutritional benefits of foods and things like that for the American culture actually came from different societies' interaction with Native Americans, and even some native traditions brought from overseas. So that's with America being like the big melting pot of all these different cultures, is definitely a great way to understand not just how other cultures eat and what they eat, but why they eat those things. And like I said, there's more probably like plant-based cultures like worldwide, especially if they haven't been touched by McDonald's. Like seriously, like McDonald's is like ruining the health of a lot of cultures that normally had long lifespans, and avoided a lot of diseases and cancers and things like that now they're starting to be more exposed to, mostly because there's a McDonald's there. So yeah, I'm on that. I'm on that with McDonald's, yes, because they haven't done anything useful for anybody ever. So maybe the Ronald McDonald House, but I guess that's their small little like give back for ruining everybody's health. So who knows? I don't know. I don't do the well, at least at least they could stop ruining everyone's health with their mystery meat. But that is pretty much all I have for today. Some of the other things that I probably would have talked about as far as like cells and things are concerned, I think would be better understood in the scope of genetics, because a lot of this stuff is more useful for like genetics, genes, protein coding, and things like that. So a lot more of that will be talked about when we get to those topics. We have 2 more weeks in this month, 1 more week, I think 1 more Tuesday. I'll have to wait and see if my experiment kit comes in time, and then we'll do the experiment when it comes. Otherwise, we are going to continue with our biological topics, and then as we get into November, I am going to switch gears and focus mainly on men's health issues, because that is the big topic for the month, the big overarching thing. Movember. I loved covering those topics last year in my little 5-minute videos, but I would definitely want to get more into detail with that, because for the most part, a lot of research, especially early health research, was based mostly on male biology. So a lot of the case studies and things that were done were mostly done on men. So it's actually more relevant when talking about men than it is when talking about women. And I want to honor that theme for the month, because it's important that men know and understand their bodies, how to take care of them, and how to live longer, even if you're not married. Because it's some men that don't want to be married, but statistics have shown that married men live longer. Why? Because women make men care about their health. All right, I'm gonna just throw that out there. All right, so women don't want to be widowed and live alone and have to bury their husbands, so they make them go to the doctor. They watch them, not like creepily, like, what you doing, but they understand when there's certain things changing with them, and they can say, hey, you haven't sleeping the same way you normally do, or your breathing sounds funny, or it's different things that someone's wife would pick up on, that they would either ignore or write off as something else, or out of fear just not want to handle it. And so I want men to be more comfortable with taking responsibility for their own health and being proactive with things, because a lot of times, like one of the main topics for Movember is prostate cancer and colorectal cancer, and both of those are 100% preventable. So yeah. And early detection actually increases survival rate. Like there's like a 95% survival rate anyway, but the earlier you detect it, the fewer like countermeasures that can be life altering. Because I know when people hear prostate cancer, they immediately think they got to get surgery and get their testicles removed and all of that. But that is like a last resort type situation. Like if you detect it early, you can usually stop it and not have to go through all of that. So it's important to be aware of that and stay on top of things and be comfortable with your own health regimen, and also with your health care. So seeing doctors and getting the tests and things done that you need done. And I know a lot, like especially with colorectal cancer, like they made a lot of jokes about seeing the proctologist and him sticking a finger up your butt. Like that's not the normal test for that day. It's a blood test. So you don't even have to, be worried about having to get that done. Like there's a lot of information to cover, so don't worry. We are definitely going to deep dive into that for Movember. I can't grow a mustache, but I already grew my hair out for y'all, right? Because I was doing the shaved wave, so I already grew my hair out. All right. So if you are a man, a male, or a grown man to be, we will be covering all types of topics, and of course, you know, I'm not going to leave the women out completely because, you know, we're here, so obviously it's not going to be just focused on that, but the main overarching topics will be for those Movember themes. So, whew, that was a lot. As usual, and as always, tune in. And like I said, we're changing the schedule for a little bit to Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Central, 12 p.m. Eastern for RockTrue Science. And I can't wait to talk more about this stuff. These are some of my more favorite topics. Like, yeah, I'm a chemist, but my concentration was in biochemistry because I really like the body because it's so complicated, but it's so simple. Like at the same time, it'll make sense. And so as always, rock truth